All right, welcome to our explainer. Today, we are jumping into something really fascinating. We're going to decode a single, incredibly intricate diagram that claims to map out the future. I mean, it is packed with symbols and timelines, and our job is to make it all make sense. So get this. The entire source for what we're talking about today is this one single chart. It lays out this very specific vision of the end times. And honestly, it's a lot to take in. So our challenge is to take this dense map and turn it into a story you can actually follow, from start to finish. Let's dive in. So, a map of the end of the world? It's a bold claim, right? But according to its creator, that's exactly what it is. A very specific sequence of events. So we're going to decode this thing together, piece by piece. And we're going to start with the one concept that really unlocks the whole thing. Okay, before we get into all the crazy events, we have to understand how time even works on this map. It all comes down to one single unit of measurement, one period of time that frames everything else. And that period is called the last 1 week. Now, I know what you're thinking. A week sounds like 7 days. But in the language of the prophecy this diagram is based on, a week actually means 7 years. So that is the most crucial thing to lock in your mind right now. This whole detailed map, all the events we're about to talk about, unfolds within one final 7-year period. That's our timeline. And what's really interesting here is that the diagram follows the parallel stories of two different groups of believers. You've got the early reign saints and the latter reign 144,000. Think of them as two sets of characters in the same story, but on very different paths. And that distinction is absolutely key to understanding this whole map. Okay, so let's jump right into the first 3.5 years. This is where the action really kicks off. And wow, it starts with a series of dramatic, world-changing events that are called the 7 trumpets. This timeline gives us a great bird's-eye view. You can see the 7 years are split right down the middle. In this first half, the big events are this sequence of 7 trumpets. So let's break down what those are. According to the chart, those first 5 trumpets are like a series of judgments being unleashed. But then, things get really intense. At the sound of the 6th trumpet, there's a catastrophe where a third of all humanity is said to die. It's all building toward that 7th and final trumpet. And this quote just perfectly illustrates how significant that last trumpet is. The diagram pulls this verse straight from Revelation, showing that the 7th trumpet isn't just another disaster. It's the moment when the mystery of God will be accomplished. It's a massive turning point. So, you might be wondering, what's happening to that first group, the early reign saints, while all this is going on? Well, the diagram is very clear. Their journey through this time of trumpets ends in martyrdom, and there's a very specific reason for it. The source uses this verse to explain that there's a full number of martyrs that has to be reached. Their sacrifice is shown as a necessary step in the timeline before the whole story can move on to the next phase. Okay, now we're moving to the absolute dead center of the timeline. This is a huge pivotal event that literally splits the 7 years in two and completely changes the game for the believers who are still alive. The event is labeled Gongjung in the source, which translates to coming in the air, but you probably know it by its more common name, the rapture. This is that moment believers are said to be taken up from the earth. And here it is, the key scripture the diagram uses to define that moment. It's this idea of the living believers being caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. This is the great fork in the road. But, and this is a huge but, what about that second group, the 144,000? This is one of the most unique features of this diagram. They are not taken in the rapture. Instead, they're moved to what's called a place of refuge, a pin on show, where they stay protected right here on Earth for the rest of those final 3.5 years. So now we're entering the final 3.5 years. The diagram describes this as a time of intense parallel conflict. You've got one battle happening in the heavens and another one raging down on Earth. And this slide just captures that dual reality perfectly. You can see that while those protected believers are on Earth, the 7 plagues are being poured out from heaven. At the exact same time, on the ground, the entity known as the Beast starts its final reign of power. It's like a cosmic war on 2 fronts. The entire 7-year timeline builds to this one event, the Jisong Jerem, which means the second coming to Earth. Now, the diagram makes it really clear that this is different from the coming in the air. This isn't a meeting in the clouds. This is a physical return to Earth for a final decisive battle. And the outcome of that final battle is spelled out right here, again, pulling scripture straight from Revelation. The beast and all its armies gather for one last fight, but they're defeated and judged, thrown into a lake of burning sulfur. And that marks the end of the 7-year conflict. So, after that final 7-year period and the Great Judgment, the war is over. But what does the map show us next? What kind of new era begins? Before we look forward, let's just pause here, because this table is a brilliant summary of the 2 journeys we've been tracking. You can see their different roles, the first fruits versus the 2 witnesses, and look at their primary experience, a total contrast. One group faces the judgments of the 7 trumpets, the other endures the reign of the beast, which leads, of course, to their totally different outcomes: martyrdom for the saints and protection for the 144,000. It's these 2 parallel but very different paths that really form the heart of this map's story. And this last chart really puts everything into a grander perspective. According to this map, that intense 7-year period we just walked through isn't the absolute end. It's more like a violent transitional phase. Look at that tiny slice. That's the 7 years of trials, and it leads to a much, much longer era, the 1,000-year kingdom. So in this view, the whole purpose of that intense conflict is to usher in this new, long-lasting age. So we started with a really dense, complex chart, and piece by piece, we've decoded its timeline, its big events, and its core story of 2 different groups on 2 very different paths. It lays out a super detailed step-by-step vision of what its creator believes is coming. And all of that kind of leaves us with one final question, doesn't it? By laying out such a specific path, one of sacrifice and another of protection, what does a prophetic map like this ultimately ask of the people who study it? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.